Fall of Saigon. It was sponsored by a Vietnamese group. Thousands of Vietnamese took to the streets of Ho Chi Minh City to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the end of the war. Tanks and a brigade of motorcycles were all part of today's festivities. Many Vietnamese hope this anniversary will mark a new understanding with the United States.
It is our stronger desire to see an early resumption of the full relations between the two countries. I think this is the aspirations of both peoples of our two countries.
Come back today and you get to appreciate this country, these people, their culture, their history, and your heart melts. Because they're certainly greeting you with open arms.
Later in the evening, the crowd was treated to a parade and fireworks show. Today's celebration was called the biggest and most festive in the city's history. The final hours of the war in Vietnam were both frightening and painful. Many of those who got out had to leave behind friends to an almost uncertain fate. Tonight, we examine those last chaotic moments in our special report, Vietnam, Losing the War, Winning the Peace. Cary Pfeffer tells us more about the fall of Saigon.
Today, the former U.S. Embassy sits empty, broken, silent. 20 years ago, it was the epicenter, the only place to be if you had sided with the Americans during all those years of the war. If you managed to find yourself inside these walls on the final days, you might get out of the country alive, but it was no guarantee. Up on the top floor of the embassy, a young CIA officer, Frank Snepp, was trying to get people out.
Well, you know, the way the war ended was the way we'd waged it, with a lot of wishful thinking. What that meant in the end was that there was no planning for an evacuation.
No evacuation plan was started or even written up because there was fear it would cause citywide panic. If there was a first priority, it was to move out remaining Americans. But beyond that, there really was no plan.
In many ways, the evacuation was an exercise, terrible to say, in racism. We saved the people in the white skin, but we left behind a lot of the people who were not white. Oh, we were very determined to make sure that no American was left behind. But we forgot a lot of Vietnamese who had come to depend on us.
As April 1975 had dragged to a close and troops from the north surrounded the city, the signal that the Americans were pulling out came during an English-language radio broadcast in Saigon. Just after high noon, an obviously out-of-season Bing Crosby song was played, and everyone knew that was it.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas.
Crowds started massing at the embassy gates, begging to be allowed inside. Within hours, the embassy grounds were filled beyond capacity.
There was a Vietnamese outside my office who had a pig under her arm. She was going to take it out. Children were crying. We were moving down the hallways from time to time, trying to make sure the South Vietnamese had no arms, because had they decided to turn on us, had they thought we were going to leave them, they would have turned on us. So there was a great charade going on. Get them up to the roof so they can be taken off. Get them up fast so they won't turn on us.
Up to the roof was really the only way out. American helicopters were coming in every few minutes, carrying people out to ships which were waiting offshore. Down below, on the embassy grounds, there was a sea of humanity. The lucky ones, the people who'd been able to get inside the embassy walls. Again and again, this group was assured, don't worry, you won't be left behind. But even with flights every few minutes, the Americans weren't coming close to getting all their loyal Vietnamese comrades out.
We had agents trapped outside the embassy who couldn't get to us, and we couldn't get to them. And they were calling, and I'm Mr. Mao, the driver. I'm so-and-so. Please come rescue me. And you'd get on the radio and say, just stay there, we will try to rescue you. But you knew you were not going to be able to do it.
While Frank Snepp and the other CIA officers on the top floor of the embassy knew the end was near, One American on the outside was thinking just the opposite. Luke Fogarty had just purchased a home here in Saigon. He was planning to settle down. At the time, Fogarty was here working with big oil companies. They'd always had good information until now.
I just didn't think anything going to happen in Vietnam because Shell was drilling, Mobil was drilling, they found oil. I figured they know more than the CIA does, so we don't have to worry about it.
But then he heard White Christmas on the radio and he knew he had to leave. He remembers the Vietnamese trust coming through in the final hours.
They have a very deep sense of dignity and decorum, I guess. They were not. I mean, none of them were panicking. They should have been panicking. We knew we were going to get out. We had no worries. But, I mean, they had to be worried.
After more than a day of waiting, Fogarty was airlifted to a U.S. aircraft carrier. For the Americans, the goal was to get out. For the troops from the north, this was their goal. The gate at the presidential palace, this was the very center of the opposition government. When all was said and done, it only took 10 minutes to take control of this spot. It was midday on April 30th when the first tank from the north crashed through the gates. In tank number 6 was a very excited 51-year-old colonel in the North Vietnamese Army, Thong Viet Dong.
We expected to take more time to seize Saigon because we expected more resistance. It was a surprise for us and our soldiers.
Of course, by the time the red flag was going up over the city, Frank Snepp and the other CIA officers over at the embassy had long ago headed to the roof themselves.
The Marine Guards took all my weapons, and they began pushing the Vietnamese out of the way. So the last of the CIA contingent could escape, and they pushed them hard. And as I made my way up this very narrow stairway, I couldn't look in their faces. They were being shoved aside to save those of us who had not bothered to save them.
When the final helicopter lifted off from the embassy roof, at least 400 people were still on the grounds below, still holding to the promise they wouldn't be left behind.
You see, for a lot of Americans, Vietnam had been like a B-52 strike from 60,000 feet. Oh, we knew we were in there punching away, but we very seldom saw the consequences of our actions. Let me tell you, that last day, we saw the consequences, all right, right in the face. We were on the deck. We'd stared it in the face. And nobody was there would ever forget it.
Cary Pfeffer, Channel 9 News.
In